Hello first years, welcome to your first Year 1 Formal Assessment 1 mark scheme. What we're going to do today is, obviously I've marked your assessment but I've given minimal comments on there because actually the marks aren't the most important thing, but the feedback on how to improve is. So I'd really like you to focus on the marks that you got and annotating your papers to tell me why you got the marks that you did, how you could have got full marks. So if you didn't get full marks, I want you to annotate it so you know how you got full marks. If you got full marks, I'd like you to annotate it so you know why you got full marks. So by the end of it, if I gave you the paper again, you could do the paper again and get full marks, obviously, because that's what we're aiming for. I wouldn't expect anyone to get full marks. If you did, well done. If you can get closer to full marks in the second formal assessment, that's really, really good. Okay. So first things first, hopefully you've all remembered the stimulus, and that whenever you see a stimulus, straight away your pen should be itching to underline various things. The things you should be underlining, if you can make a note of these please, are the IV, the DV, the method, the sample, the sampling method, the experimental design, controls and possible extraneous variables. So IV, DV, method, experimental design, sample, sampling method, extraneous variables, control variables, or controls, not variables. Okay? If you didn't do that, you must do it every time you see it. That is the key to doing well in research methods questions, as you'll see when we look through the questions. Okay? So I'm going to bring all of these up. So in yellow, we've got the sample, so 30 people. That's what we know about them. So 15 in condition A and 15 in condition B. There we go, that's all of it. The IV, which is in green, is either separately in a room or 5 groups of equal size. So it's whether they're on their own or whether they're in a group. And as you know, operationalising the IV is naming both conditions. And then the number of ideas generated in green is the DV. And what you want to do is you want to tell me how you are measuring creativity. Well, we're measuring creativity based on the number of ideas that the person generated. Okay, we've got participants were randomly allocated to one of 2 conditions. So that's in purple. So that's the experimental design because it's one. They only did one of the 2 conditions. And already you want to be thinking about that because it's the first question you do. And then everything in grey is a control. Okay. The method, which is the only thing I haven't highlighted because it's not made it clear, but as you know, the first question you should ask yourself is there an IV and a DV? There is, so it must be an experiment, either a lab, field, natural or quasi. And then the next 2 questions you can ask in either order are, can the participants be randomly allocated? They have been, that's a control that's highlighted in grey, so therefore you're between a lab and a field. And then they're asked to go and sit in a room and write as many ideas as they can, which to me sounds fairly artificial. If you think it's the last time that you did that, if it wasn't very recently, then it's quite fake. And therefore, if you can randomly allocate and the environment is artificial, then it is a lab. And then loads and loads of controls are in place. So the fact it's randomly allocated, they were both asked to write down their ideas, which is a control because it's standardized procedure, as was the fact they were given 40 minutes, and the task was the same, raising funds for the local youth club. Okay, I haven't put down any extraneous variables at this point, but they are all the things that you want to be thinking of. And this will become clear as to why. So the first question, identify the experimental design used in this study and outline one advantage of this experimental design. So 1 mark for the experimental design and 2 marks for the advantage. And you don't need to contextualise because whilst they've asked for the experimental design used in this study, they haven't asked you to outline one advantage of this experimental design in this study. So therefore, you do not need to contextualise. Okay, if you have, that doesn't matter. It's better to do it when you don't need to than not do it when you should, because you can easily still get marks. So you can feel a bit smug if you've contextualised. The experimental design is independent groups. And because it's an advantage, you structure it in the P style. So a strength of the experiment of independent groups is, this is a strength because. It's independent groups because they did one of two conditions. They only did one condition, and therefore their groups are independent of each other. So the first mark you would get, and I've suggested 3 things here from the mark scheme. However, if you can think of anything else that you think is fair, then you get a mark. You can give yourselves the marks. However, you do not get any marks for saying that we can compare the groups more effectively. The experimental design doesn't matter how you compare the groups. So if you've talked about we can compare the groups better or something about group comparisons, then that is not correct. You do not get any marks for that. Okay. Performances. So a strength of independent groups is that the performances are not affected by order effects, as people only do one condition. This is a strength because it increases the validity of the study as it controls for extraneous variables. If you've mentioned anything roughly like that, give yourself 2 marks. Another one might be that a strength of independent groups is that it controls for demand characteristics because they're only aware of their own condition. Again, this increases the validity of the study. Or the same tasks and materials can be used in both conditions. This removes extraneous variables and increases validity. So you can start to see where the second point is always about validity. Always link it back to validity. Okay. Describe. So it's an AO1 skill. All you need to do is describe it. One other experimental design that researchers use in psychology. Again, no need to contextualize it. And you get 1 mark if you talk about repeated measures and explain that participants complete both conditions of the experiment, or be better to say all conditions of the experiment because there might be more than 2. All matched pairs, and you need to mention all of these things to get the marks if you went with matched pairs. Participants are pre-tested and then matched on variables which might affect the DV. Give yourselves a mark. One of the pairs does one condition and one does the other condition. So one of the pair does one condition and one does the other condition, not one of the pairs. Apologies. Okay. Apart from using random allocation, suggest one way in which the psychologist might have improved this study by controlling for the effects of extraneous variables. Justify your answer. Improved is always about an evaluation point of strength moving forward, a really important one to remember. This study must be contextualised. So I'd like to read your answer now. I'd like to look at the stimulus and I'd like you to underline where you've made some reference to the stimulus. So it might be that it was group against groups and on their own. You might mention creativity. You might mention youth centre ideas. You might mention being in a room on their own. You might mention writing down their ideas maybe. I can't think of anything else, but anything that makes it clear it's for this stimulus and not another random stimulus. Okay, you get 1 mark for suggesting a control and 1 mark for explaining why it would be a good control. So the first mark, for example, test all participants in the same room. That's 1 mark. So that variables in the room don't affect the participants' creativity. I've mentioned creativity and I've mentioned the same room, so that would get me the marks. Okay. Make sure that all participants hear the same instructions, or if you mentioned standardized script, that works well, so that some don't get more information about the task than others. Now, that is not contextualized. So if you said that without contextualizing it, then you wouldn't get the marks. But quite simply, all you could change is so that some don't get more information about the task about the task of developing ideas for a youth club than others. So just make sure. Ensuring that all participants are assessed by the same researcher so that something about the experimenter doesn't affect participants' creativity. Okay, so something about the experimenter doesn't affect participants' creativity. If you've mentioned another one, you do get marks for crediting other ones. If you think that your control is a good control, that's great. If you think that you've explained why you put that in control in place, then that's good. You get your 2nd mark. And if you've been able to underline something to contextualise it, then you can get both marks. If you haven't, you don't get any marks. Write a suitable hypothesis. You get 1 mark for any type of hypothesis. If what you've written looks like a hypothesis, an alternative, a null, a directional, non-directional, then you can access your 1st mark. If you've started with the phrase to investigate, that's not a hypothesis, that's an aim. 1 mark for operationalising the IV, so alone or in a group of 5. although actually it should be a group of 3. And 1 mark for operationalising the DV, the number of ideas. Okay, so if your hypothesis looks any like this 3 below, then you get the mark. So can you give yourselves a tick for writing a hypothesis? And your hypothesis might have been there'll be a difference between, give yourselves a tick. The number of ideas suggested, give yourselves a tick. By those who are alone and those in a group, give yourselves a tick. Apologies, I had to pause. I was going to sneeze. Very just like on the radio when they have to mute the mute button for a minute. The next one, those in a group will have a higher number of ideas than those who work alone. So you mentioned a group, you've mentioned working alone, you've mentioned the number of ideas, or there'll be no difference, give yourself a tick, because it's a null between the number of ideas, give yourselves a tick. By those in a group and those on their own, give yourselves a tick. So make sure you mention all those things. And from the information given in the description, calculate the number of participants. Your answer is 3. You don't need to show your workings. It just has 1 mark. But it's 15 participants split into 5 groups. So 15 divided by 5 equals 3. Remember, in the exam, you can take a calculator, get into that habit. This maths is not too bad, although I'd probably struggle with it. But the maths can become more complicated. You must bring a calculator with you. Name a measure of dispersion the psychologist could use. The key phrase here, measure of dispersion. So you could either name range or standard deviation. If you've mentioned mean, median or mode, then you are mentioning the measures of central tendency and you do not get any marks. Please can you note down, if you have done that, can you circle them? Measures of central tendency, mean, median and mode, measures of dispersion, range, standard deviation. Explain how. So hopefully you've highlighted that step-by-step guide. The psychologist could have used random allocation to assign the 15 participants in condition B. So specifically condition B. So step by step, it must be a step-by-step guide. And the way you get that 3 marks is 1 mark for saying all participants are allocated a number from 1 to 15. All the number 15s are put in a hat. Sorry, all the 15 numbers are put in a hat. Now, if you said that all the participants' names were placed in a hat, then that would get you the marks, because you'd write the names down and then you put them in the hat. So that 2 marks, as long as you've got all 15 participants' name in a hat, then you get the marks. Or if you've mentioned a random computer generator, you put all the names into a random computer generator, that would be fine too. This mark is the most important one to get. So what I want you to think about is assign the first 3 numbers drawn to a group and repeat the process for 4 other groups. So that means you pull out the first 3 numbers, number 7, number 4 and number 15. They are in one group. That's group 1. Number 2, number 6 and number 9, they are in group 2. So you're making sure that you end up with 5 groups of 3. So can you read your final mark and make sure you have made it clear how you will end up with 5 groups of 3. If all you've said is draw all the names out of a hat, that's no good. You've got a massive group of 15. So you must make sure you make it clear. Or you could say that you draw out the first name and that's group 1, the second name that's group 2, third name group 3, fourth name group 4, fifth grade name group 5, but then you must explain that you do that process 3 times, so you end up with 3 people per group. So please make sure about that. Random allocation, you must always make it clear how you're going to get the even number. Okay, and there it said on the mark scheme, accept other valid descriptions that will be practical and produce the same outcome. So if they're realistic, you can actually achieve them, and you end up with 5 groups of 3. And then the final one, at the end of the study, the psychologist debriefed each participant. Write a debriefing the psychologist could read out to the participants in condition A. There are 2 extremely important things here, so I'd like you to underline them, make a note of them. Writing a debrief that the psychologist could read out to the participants in condition A. So read out to the participants is important, in condition A is important. So these people in condition A do not know about condition B. And that's really important, because in a debrief, they need to find out everything that happened in the study that they weren't aware of, that they were deceived of, or just not told about. So you must have these 2 things in your answer. So I'd like you to look out for them, but then I want you to wait for the second slide to come up about this question to help you mark it. But first of all, just note you've got these. So an explanation of the aim, to see if creativity is affected by the presence or absence of others. So if you've made some reference to the aim of the study was to look at the effect of creativity, of being in a group and on your own and creativity, that would be fine. Or the effect of people on creativity, that would be fine. You've got that. In every debrief, you must always, always mention the aim. And I talked about that before. And the second thing you must include is information about the other condition. So in the independent groups, people need to know about the condition in which they did not take part. So condition A, the participants were on their own. So they do not know about condition B, where people were asked to do this task in a group. So you must explain that. Okay, that's why the condition A is bolded. Okay, so that when anything's bolded in the question, it's so important. It's really, really important. And then optional content. So what this means is it doesn't matter what you write about as long as it's to do with ethics. You must have the top two things, or you can have any, and then after that you can have any variation of the ones underneath. So the right to withdraw, well, of course they've completed the experiments, they can't withdraw from the experiment, but they can withdraw their data from the experiment at any time, and they just need to contact the researcher. Confidentiality, so their data will not be shared with anybody, and they will not be identifiable when the results are published. So the data, their identifiable data, names, things like that, will not be shared with anybody that it's not essential it's shared with, and when it's published it will be anonymized. You will not be able to identify them. And finally, protection from harm. So they should leave this experiment the way they arrived, both physically and emotionally. If they feel they've got any concerns about that, then they should contact you, and you could leave a made-up phone number, 01623 654 321, or psychologist@psychology.com, something like that. Anything that you want, okay? And then, of course, you can thank your participants for taking part as well. So the way that you would mark this is, if you have not included both elements of the required content, then you are limited to 1 out of 2 marks. So if you have not included an explanation of the aim and information about the other condition, if you've only mentioned one of those, then you would get between 1 or 2 marks, okay? The other reason that you would only get 1 out of 2, it says verbatim form is lacking. Verbatim is just a fancy way of saying, in this case, in this context, it must be able to be read out loud. If you have put, I would tell the psychologist to say this, this, and this, then that is not verbatim. It cannot be read out, and you'd be limited to 1 of 2 marks. Okay? If you've mentioned both elements, but they're not brilliant, you've sort of got them in there, but not really, then you can be up to 3 or 4. And there's some of the answer is in verbatim, so you could read some of it out and it would be justifiable. So you'd say, you've sort of said, you've made some of it so the psychologist could read it out loud, but you might have occasionally slipped and gone back into writing it as if it's instructions. And then finally, for 5 or 6, you must have both elements in there, and they must be clear and well detailed, and it must all be written as if it could be a script that could be read out by the psychologist. So, hello, thank you for taking part in the study about then that's what it is. Okay, so that is why potentially your marks are where they are. So now that you've marked your paper, annotated it, lots and lots of detail, please. So go back and look through and think, if I was giving this to somebody else and wanted them to get full marks, would they be able to get full marks from my annotation? And then I would like you to, on the next page of the booklet, I'd like to create a table, and I would like you to have a column that is topics I got full or almost full marks on, and topics I lost marks on. And then I'd like you to go through these, looking at the marks you've given the question. So the first question, and I'll try to do them in order as much as possible. The first question is about experimental design. If you got full or almost full marks on those, you can put that in the topics I got full marks on. Whereas if you didn't, you put it as the topic I lost marks on. Be generous, be kind, don't put absolutely, if you didn't get full marks, don't put everything in the column I lost marks on. I want you to think practically. So go with the one you lost the most marks on first, and the maximum number of topics I lost marks on I would like is 3. So work backwards, find the 3 questions you lost the most marks on. They are your 3 topics you lost marks on. All the others you got close or almost full marks on, so you can put those in the close or full marks. Identify something that went well. Did you remember to contextualise? Did you remember to underline the stimulus? Did you remember to underline the questions? Something like that. So anything at all, you'll have all definitely done at least one thing well. And then something that you need to improve on for next time. So did you forget to contextualise? Did you forget to underline the stimulus? Did you forget to underline the key terms? Did you not use the piece structure? Whatever it might be. And then most importantly, how are you going to improve on that? So what concrete physical activity are you going to take part in to improve the thing that you need to improve on? So next time, when Denna or myself are marking your assessments, we will not need to give you that feedback. Okay, on Moodle, if you go onto Moodle in the folders, there is a past exam folder or past questions folder, exam questions folder. If you click on that, in there will be, there are checklists for every single topic, and then there are questions for every single topic on the checklist. So for example, on the research methods checklist, there's a top option about hypotheses, and then if you click, there are questions, and there's a document underneath called hypotheses, and there's every single past question on hypotheses, and then there is the mark scheme underneath it as well. So that would be a really simple way of improving your exam technique. If it's knowledge, is it flashcards, is it posters? It must be something that tests your knowledge though. So you must be testing your knowledge, not just, I'll read my notes again and summarise them. No, you must test your knowledge. So you're going to read your notes, and as you read them, you're going to write yourself exam questions, not even exam questions, like little quiz questions, like how does a name start, and then have another piece of paper answer to investigate. And then you can go back and you can revise over them. Is it flashcards? Is it Quizlet Online? Something concrete that will make a difference. Okay, right. Then the next thing and the final thing that I would like you to do is I would like you to find any question that you didn't get full marks on, and I would like you to rewrite it, please, now that you have the paper annotated in front of you. Okay, thank you very much.